Hey gang, welcome back to the True Wealth Radio Show. I'm your host Dave Littlejohn in studio with
Matt Dixon.
All right, and we now have the live stream up. It is cranking along here, so you're
Where
welcome
can
to
they
join
find
us.
it?
Go to Facebook or YouTube. They're both there. So Little John FS, and you can check them out. Here's the dirty little secret. By the way, if you're just joining us, again, if you're getting this on the live stream, there's going to be a podcast, and you can get the missing 15 minutes or so at the beginning where we talked about all kinds of stuff, including if you're not paying for the product, especially online or on any screen for that matter, you are the product.
Oh, okay.
And Matt, you started talking about apparently you
You
can
can customize your own advertisements now on Hulu. So, you get three choices, and then you pick how they advertise to you.
Okay. And then I said I have a dirty little secret for you.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess you'd really enjoy getting to pick your advertisements.
I don't have Hulu.
You don't have Hulu?
Nope.
You know what? It doesn't surprise me because there's like 50,000 different streaming services now. So it's like, oh, well, do you have Paramount Plus?
So we have very limited options. We have we still have Netflix, despite the fact that every now and then they do things that irritate me, and I have to kind of monitor it as a parent with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Disney Plus because it kind of came with our phone package.
Okay.
So those are the two primaries. And then we have a family share program with Apple Movies and stuff like that, where we do that kind of deal. But and then Amazon Prime.
Everyone has Amazon Prime.
Right. So those are it. And the reality is, I don't watch a ton of
me either.
stuff. Right. We'll watch movies sometimes in the evening, and I'm really trying to take my own advice. This is not just my advice. I mean, I got this from other people. I'm trying to live this advice now, which is to spend a lot more time reading, and I read mostly nonfiction. So it's nerdy stuff, but math this one out, right?
Okay.
If you spent a half an hour a day reading some kind of professional development or personal development, right? Then just in a work week, you're going to have 2.5 hours a week, right? So in 50 weeks a year, what are you going to have, right? Another.
You're going to have read a lot of books.
Exactly. I mean, so every month, if you're 2.5 hours, so you're looking at 10 hours a month times 12 months, you're looking at roughly 120 hours a year. That's more than the credit hours you typically get taking a full load in college.
Wow.
So you start to do that, and over a course of 2 or 3 years, you're going to develop a PhD's worth of knowledge. If you do that for 10 years, you're going to have a really deep deck of knowledge. So,
and your brain can retain it too. Like, you'll be like, I've read 75 books, and I remember all of them.
I don't know if it really works that way.
Let me tell you about the 23rd book I read on page 47.
It's not like
quality
that.
Content.
I am not. First, photographic memories are a myth. Especially there's only like 5 or 6 people in the world that have been documented to have legitimate photographic memories.
And you're one of the 5.
No,
congratulations.
I'm not.
You are the 1%.
No, I don't.
The
That
0.1%.
That is inaccurate. That is inaccurate. Matt's just so you lock on to data that means something to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that's the key to all of this stuff is if you're reading stuff that you don't care about, it's going to disappear to the ether. But if you read lots of stuff, and to me, it's like, imagine just like when you build a house, first you put in a foundation, and then you build the framing structure, and then you start adding the other stuff inside the framework, and then you start, putting up the sheetrock and decorating. Well, knowledge works that way.
It really does.
You build a framework, and then you add to it, and you develop, and when you understand something, other things make sense too because the connections form between them. It's really hard. Like, I struggle with names when I first meet people.
Really? I would not have guessed that.
Yeah, it's I have to actively think about a person when I first meet them. I have to repeat their name in my head a whole bunch, and I'll often forget to do that. But I'm very good at the details and their life circumstance. So I'll meet somebody and I'll remember where they're from, why they were there, their backstory, lots of stuff. And I'll go like, oh man, I just caught all these details except for the one that's going to matter, which is your name. But funny enough, when I get you on the phone, if I hear your name on the phone, most of the time, I'll remember it. because I'm not distracted by the other stuff. So I just take in your name and then keep going. And later on, so this happens when I'm doing like a phone service call or something. You're like, oh, that's right, that was Tabitha or whatever. And at the end of the call, I'm like, oh, well, thanks for the help, Tabitha. You're welcome. I just remember the name. Who knew?
I think that's off of a Parks and Rec episode where the guy remembers an acronym about something in the room, and then that person, and then they just correlate it, boom, they never forget it.
Well, I should try that. That'd
Yeah.
be interesting. So, anyway, back to home base here.
Okay.
Talking about why all of this matters. Like, why do we care about? So, first of all, Dave's memory, we don't care. Like, you guys don't care, and that's okay. You shouldn't care. Matt just likes to tease me because
I do.
I don't know.
Seize these opportunities when they present themselves. But I put us in the weeds, didn't I?
No, I think I did it. It all comes back to the thread of how advertising and the media that we consume will be fed the things that will oftentimes confirm what we're looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And confirmation bias is such a very serious and dangerous thing in the investment landscape, because you can find yourself going down a path and developing very strong convictions around information that may not be fully accurate, right? And so,
I mean, I think I get where you're going with this. So if you Google like, why is the stock market down, and the computer registers that, and it could start feeding you with algorithms. You know, here's
all
an
the
article
different
why
reasons.
the stock market is down.
Yeah. Well, as an example, one of the things, and this is accurate, and yet we need to consider a lot of fertilizer supplies come out of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so now there's discussion about, because of the interruption in supply chains of Ukraine and wheat production, they apparently have a very high wheat production there. Then what does that do in terms of potential food shortages? And what's it going to do to the cost of food when you consider the increased cost of fuel for both farming, delivery of food, and then also the increased cost of fertilizer because of scarcity, because of the lack of supply coming out of Russia?
I would argue that we're already starting to see it.
Yeah. Well, we are already seeing it. My point is, does this surprise the market?
I don't.
Is it, like, if you discovered this right now, is the market going like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. Thank goodness they said it on the radio.
Right.
Right?
No, there's people that are way smarter than us that watch this stuff.
Or they're way plugged in,
Well,
right?
yeah.
And so I keep trying to explain to people that the market knows a lot of stuff. The question is, and some of this is coin flip, it's not really predictable stuff, is what doesn't the market know yet? And will it be worse or better than what it already knows?
That's a great question.
Right? So when I ask you, Matt,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think the market doesn't know looking out there on the horizon?
The market doesn't know what the next catastrophe might be,
Sure.
and it doesn't know what the next blessing might be, right? Like, what if the war between Ukraine and Russia just ends?
Yeah, which could happen.
Yeah, I mean, Vladimir Putin, they said, is really sick, and they're giving him at most 3 years to live. So what if he, is really sick, like they say that he is,
Mm-hmm.
and he passes, and then all the other Russian, heads of state are like, you know what? That was his mission, not ours. We're done with this. And then the U.S. lifts sanctions on oil. Oil prices fall. I mean, who knows, right? We can just sit here and speculate all day long.
Right.
But
right.
we don't know. And there's a lot of different things that could happen that really make a huge impact really quickly on these markets. Because I think if you look at it, there's a lot of people that are watching this really, really close saying, is this a buying opportunity? Is this a buying opportunity? We're 20, 30% off in some different stocks that are pretty big players.
Right.
Where's my opportunity? And if you give the market a glimmer of hope, it could run back.
It
run back
could.
quick.
Now,
Or
what's the flip side? Yeah, what's
the
the
flip
flip
side is, what if Vladimir Putin's really sick and he says, drop a nuclear bomb, right?
Right, that would be a game changer,
It
no
would.
question. What if it really is that significant a shortage in fertilizer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or what if we have another disruption in fuel supplies? And I know.
What if China invades Taiwan like they talked about doing, and then the chip shortage gets 10 times worse?
Yeah. I mean, these are all things that could theoretically happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some other things that are very interesting, right? What if, for example, here's one that I think is more real than people realize. What if the credit markets with the Federal Reserve raising rates and financial institutions following suit and realizing that they now have more risk, what if we engineered more of a credit crisis with the consumer than people realize? And what I mean by this is lots of people have said, you know what? The consumer, in fact, this is a point, this is going to take longer than I can really unpack before the break. We should do this.
Give me a lead into what
so
you'd say.
We want to talk about how credit spreads are changing and how that can impact the market. But the music play and let's grab a break real quick.
Okay.
This is David
And Matt.
and you're listening to True Wealth on News Radio 93.9 FM and 1240 KQEN. All right.
Well, do we have any comments from our live streamers?
I see no comments.
Oh, well, if you're watching, we want comments.
Right? I know. I went for the what. I want to see if anybody sent me on Facebook on my other device. Did we get...
Yeah, let's check the other phones.
Did we get any words for... the words that we need to define? Yeah. Wasabadana? Wasabodanancial. That's okay. April, balanced budget. Conflation. Okay. $1. Obfusculation. That one's fun. Stagflation. So we've got some fun ones here. Let's see. What else might be on the list? And that's the one. We might be able to get to all of those. Those are pretty good. Conflation. Yeah. We're going to have fun with these. This is great. Argentina is officially reporting actual hyperinflation. 52%. Yes. I think that is one of those to discuss too. It's like, do we have
a global problem more than the U.S.?
Well, I mean, we have a global problem.
We do.
And so we can talk about gold for a second too. That's always an interesting one. Like, why would gold's price go down if we have inflation?
Hey, there's our term for the day, gold coin. You have Bitcoin. What about the good old-fashioned Bitcoin?
Yeah. Okay. Well, this one, let's look at the GLD as a benchmark here. It is up year to date, but barely. And 6 months.
Have you made up any words for me to define?
No, I haven't made any up yet.
I've got one for you. How about crypto cramp?
Crypto cramp?
Mm-hmm. Crypto cramp.
Yeah. People are asking, is no live stream? I'm like, yeah, it should be on right now. Maybe it's broken. I guess we'll have to find out, or we'll have to post it afterwards.
I think it's running because there's a button on mine that says in the
Yeah, it looks like it's running to me too, so we'll see.
We should text someone at the office to tune in and drop a comment.
All right. All right, gang, welcome back to the True Wealth Show. It is definitely the greatest Tuesday you've had all week, and we're stoked to have you back in studio with us. Matt,
Yes.
Help me out. Where did we leave off?
We left off with you saying, hey, we're about to get to some cool stuff right after the break. And then we started making up a bunch of weird words.
Oh, yeah, so that'll be a section we come to later. We took a poll on Facebook and said we want to add a new feature to the show, right? Or a new feature, event, whatever. But where we take financial terms that are fictional terms and then we give them definitions on air. Okay?
Yeah.
So we got a few and we'll try to get to that here in a moment. But what I was talking about was the blowout in credit spreads. Okay, and what that means to the market. And when you say blowout in credit spreads, like what does that mean? Okay, first of all, a spread, the most common place you're going to see this is in banking. Like the spread is the difference between a deposit and what the bank can loan the money to somebody else at. And the spread is the profit margin between those two. That's what the banks operate on. But we also measure spreads between different length or credit quality instruments. So let's say you want to look at the difference between a 30-year treasury
and a jump bond,
or a 30-year bond and a 10-year treasury.
Oh,
Okay. That's the 30-10 spread. Let's say you want to look at the 10-year treasury versus the 2-year treasury. We call that the 2-10 spread, right? And that's a really common one, by the way, because that's 10 years is kind of the threshold where you start to call that long term, right? And then 2 years is still relatively short term in terms of credit quality. And so anything less than a year, they're not even really bonds typically anymore. You're talking about commercial paper, or you're talking about really short term like notes and so forth. So the 2-10 spread, though, is the difference in interest rates between a 10-year and 2-year. You would expect 10-year rates or yields to be higher.
Right.
Because
But lately,
more risk. Well, it's not always. If it's inverted, you have a different problem.
and we have seen that.
We have seen that. That's typically forecasting some kind of recessionary environment. Because if long-term rates are lower than short-term rates, what that's suggesting is, well, the long-term prospects of the economy are going to get worse. So but short-term, we're expecting things to roll over. So it's not supposed to be that way. You're supposed to have a curve where short-term rates are lower than long-term rates because longer-term should be higher risk, right? Should be, and so you should be getting paid more for that. Well, what we're seeing in the economy right now is concerning, where you're starting to see things like, and some of this is anecdotal. I'm still chasing data on this, but we're wanting to check this out, is the potential for increased amount of repossessions of vehicles, for example. We're seeing people that went out and had questionable credit, or they took stimulus money that they didn't have more of, and they used that stimulus money to go buy vehicles, luxury vehicles in particular, and now they're unable to make those payments, and so those cars are being repossessed. That is lower credit quality, right? But meaning when you make loans to folks that have bad credit, call those low credit quality, and when those loans do not perform, meaning the person that borrowed the money doesn't pay you back, then you start to go and repossess collateral. On one hand, that's bad sign for the markets. When the bad credit starts to default, it usually means that it starts to cost more to get loans. So bad credit's going to see an increase in cost, or interest rates will go up on lower quality credit.
And interest rates have already been going up.
They've been going up.
It's like a double whammy.
Well, it's definitely a double whammy. Now, what will also happen is it could change the value of vehicles. If you want to know how deflationary pressure could work, flood the market with repossessed vehicles. And now all of a sudden the supply and demand curve changes a lot. And if that's the case, then you're going to see a shift in pricing. Okay.
Especially if they can start producing some chips and getting some new vehicles.
That would be the theory, right? Because a lot of these manufacturers, they are concerned, right? Hey, how are we going to, we have backlog inventory. We need to push that out. This also, by the way, we're starting to see in retail. We're seeing a flood of, look at like the Marshalls and the TJ Maxx or the Ross business model.
Have a ton of stuff.
There's a lot
because people are closing up their wallets and saying,
it wasn't just that. Backlogged inventory for a long time. It's finally catching up, and the customer's like, we don't have the discretion anymore. We don't have discretionary income because everything got so expensive. So
that's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
I mean, there was a report just yesterday about how much less gas American consumers are using. They're not traveling as much because they just don't want to pay the price.
It's expensive.
Yeah, it cost me $180 to fill up my truck the other day.
Yeah, it is crazy expensive. So with everything like that, it's going to put a strain on the system. You're already seeing it in like lumber prices. They're starting to come down too. And everybody wants a house, but not when your interest rate goes from 3% to 5.5%.
Right.
All of a sudden, it's a lot more expensive.
The demand starts to wane.
And so the demand changes, and it's not going to stop overnight because people do need a place to live. But my goodness, we're at that threshold where people just can't afford it. And creativity can only go so far. And how many roommates can you have?
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of our other issues at play here. Now, I think that this is typically when you start to see credit spreads like that widen a lot, and you see a big divergence between good credit and bad credit quality, that has historically been something that is a sign that a lot of I have some other advisors. We've had kind of our own, let's call it like an advisor mastermind for years. That has been a signal for us in the credit markets that it is going to be tough sledding for the stock market. So there's a threshold at which the uncle point occurs. We haven't seen that so far, right? But we have seen historically that when credit spreads get too awful, then that's a bad sign for the stock market. It usually means more downside risk. And I'm not convinced that that is out of the question, because even if fuel prices come off their peaks a little bit, I think that the price of food and housing is still so expensive right now,
Right.
that folks are going to have to make adjustments in their budget.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, like there's just not going to be the discretion available. And so this is just a very real thing.
Do you think that the Fed might look at this and say, maybe we shouldn't continue with the rate hikes? We should soften up on that? Or do you think the Fed's just going to keep their nose down and keep plugging away at this?
I think the Fed is in a really awful position of one, they probably got it mostly right, but not right enough to not feel pain economically. And I think they're covering for a lot of the woes of Washington, D.C. and really, really stupid policy. I'll just say it on air.
Yeah.
Stupid money printing policy. And I can kind of get away with this a little bit because I sort of pounded the desk ever since the very beginning of the pandemic. And everybody had their reasons, and I'm not really saying, I'm right, you're wrong. That's not what's going on here. But my initial assessment was we're doing the math wrong on the cost of this thing, and that the money printing was going to have severe consequences, that they would manifest in the economy through major disruption. And everybody kind of said, who cares, because we got to save grandma. And so it made it sound like I was ready to throw grandma off the train. And that really wasn't the case. That's not what I was advocating for. But what I was saying is the costs associated with what we're going to do will absolutely be expensive and painful. And all we were doing was deferring the pain by printing money. Now, I've got, somebody online that I know, I'd say he's a friend of mine who's online, and he pointed out that it's not just in the United States. COVID wrecked a lot of stuff, but I could tell you that the behavior of money printing for most centralized governments, most fiat currencies in the printing, has created a string of challenges, right? Venezuela running 52%, according to this data that this gentleman just shared.
Yeah.
So that's official hyperinflation. Okay, that's going to be a hot mess, right? So
what do you know what number they switch it over from?
I think it's over 50. It's like once you go over 50%, it's considered hyperinflation.
Right, and the Fed's saying we're at 8, right?
Yeah, well, our published is 8. Some metrics are closer to 20.
Yeah,
but
it feels like 20 to 30.
Well,
it feels like
areas of the economy even 20 to 30.
Yeah,
right. We've definitely experienced that much in some areas, but I don't think that's really how exotic it is everywhere. But the reality is where we feel it is. Right? Like if you try to go buy ice cream and you're like, wait a second, this ice cream costs 40% more than it used to, and the container is smaller. Okay, you're going to notice. So that's real. And then people start making substitutions in their behavior and so forth. But because we can't just all say I have 40% more money now. Right? You can't do that. So everything's 40% more, so I just have 40% more money. Voila, problem solved. Now there is something interesting that I think we can. I think we should talk about this so that our listeners can make a funny connection, right?
Okay.
I'm going to tease this because we got to take our last break. But the issue is gold, right? If you've heard that gold is something that you should buy in an inflationary environment, is that the case?
Ooh, this is
right?
a good way to end the show.
Right. So we're gonna talk about that after this last obscene profit break.
Okay.
All right, so stick around if you want to hear our theory on gold prices and inflation right after this. This is Dave Littlejohn.
And Matt Dixon.
And you got True Wealth on News Radio 93.9 FM and 1240 KQEN.
So, Before we came over here, what was the name of the show going to be? And how we stuck to the.
That's a funny question.
I don't remember what it was. Well, do we have any commenters?
We do.
Okay.
Well, no, we don't have commenters on the live stream. I think we broke that. I think Facebook maybe didn't push it on because it was too late. I think after 10 minutes. We're probably streaming YouTube right now.
Okay.
So, yeah, we'll figure it all out. I feel like the tutu in the background. I think that's pretty cash.
There you go.
All right, so we'll draw the gold connection, and then we'll do a few words that we need to define for our general population here, and then we'll get rocking.
Okay.
Balanced budget. That is too fictional. I can't do that.
What's your favorite
What's
one so far?
What's my what?
What's your favorite one that they sent you so far?
Conflational and obfusculation.
Huh.
My father writes stagflation. I'm like, you can really look that one up.
Yeah, we talked about that one.
Stagflation we've covered before. It's when you mix in a bull elk with inflation. So it's a really big bull elk. It's stagflation.
There you go.
All right. What's about dimensional? What's about dimensional? I'm gonna have to think on that one. I'm pretty sure that's a that's a typo. That's what that is.
We haven't talked about economics.
Economics, yeah. That's when you trust your financial advisor to tell you about the economy.
Economics.
All right, home stretch.
Okay.
Hey gang, welcome back to the True Wealth Show. Dave Littlejohn in studio with
Matt Dixon.
Okay, if you're just joining us, grab the podcast. It'll be at our website tomorrow, littlejohnfs.com under the Educate tab, or of course your favorite streaming services, right? So grab your podcast, and we're linking them all up and doing the jazz there. When we took to the break, we were going to talk about the connection between the markets and gold. A lot of people ask me about silver and gold right now.
Yeah. Because
inflation, should we be buying silver and gold? The really wacky thing about this is year to date, gold is more or less flat. It's gone up a little bit, it's gone back down a little bit. On a 1 year basis, it's actually negative for 1 year, at least the GLD, which is it's an exchange traded fund that mimics the price of gold. It's up over 5 years, right? It's actually up pretty well. It went from 118 to 100. So it's probably the last 5 years up 60, 70%.
10 years. Let's get a real long-term look.
Let's see. If we go back to about 2005, right, it looks like it went from $42 a share to $171 a share. So what is that? About a 400% increase since 05? But the reality is that most stuff since 05 is up that much.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we've had pretty radical escalation. And so escalation, right? It's one of them is moving stairs. The other one is a fictional word. We'll get to those in a second. So I think that the problem here is that gold connects not just in US dollars, right? If let's think about, we just talked about how Venezuela's got inflation rates running at 52%.
Right.
Okay, hyperinflation. So right now the US dollar, even though we've printed a ton of currency, looks a lot more attractive than the Venezuelan dollar.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And the issue is a lot of other economies in Europe and Japan and elsewhere, and even Canada, by comparison, because of the economic impact of COVID on those economies, ended up in worse shape than the United States. So even though we printed a lot of money and we have a lot of inflation, comparatively speaking, there are other places that are worse because either they have demographics or economics that look less attractive than the U.S. So the U.S. as a dollar relative to the rest of the world, the currency still managed to get stronger, even in an inflationary environment.
Yeah, I think I saw that Europe has experienced more inflation than the United States for the first time in a decade.
Right.
Yeah.
So that throws off the relationship between commodities, including gold, and the dollar and other currencies. So it makes it kind of weird, right? And that's part of what makes gold harder to call, right? If you're willing to
Well, yeah, it is harder to call because you got to think, what's the other thing that we've thrown in the mix? I mean, gold used to be the way to hedge against inflation. Now people are choosing to use
Bitcoin,
yeah,
crypto. Well, and which has also struggled, right? Bitcoin's been crushed. You would have rather owned gold than Bitcoin for the last year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just so or at least maybe not for the year. Last 6 months, easy.
Oh, yeah.
Last 6 months, Bitcoin's off from its high of like 70,000 down to, I don't know, 31, 32,000. So it's been really hammered. Gold has been nowhere near as beat up as Bitcoin over the same time period, right? It's still mostly positive.
When you look at a country like Venezuela, they're not choosing to exchange their money out for gold. They've been exchanging it out for cryptocurrency.
I don't know where it's gone. I can't even make that statement. It may be true.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Right. So it's an interesting one. I still think that Bitcoin, while a great concept, and I think that the blockchain is a great concept.
Regulated, and then once it's regulated,
it's just an interesting animal, right? Because how does it defend itself? You can say, well, it's distributed everywhere, and so that's true. But how does it defend itself? So that I'll just leave that here, subject for a different show. But gold has not been the gold or silver bullet against inflation, right? It's actually gold has declined in price when inflation's gone up, and that's counterintuitive. But it has to do, in addition to gold, with other currencies and supply and demand, and how other currencies are behaving, right? And competition for crypto now. So it's an interesting animal.
I wonder if part of that is the fact that we're mining gold at such a high rate. Like the market's actually being flooded with a large amount of new gold.
Again, things that I'm unaware of, but changing the supply without changing the demand would make that a very real thing. So I think it's an interesting one. So I don't have the answer to gold. I just know that historically, for me, gold is a tougher one to understand how it's going to do something for you other than be a store of value somewhere. And you operate under the assumption that gold will have future value, right? That's the assumption. It historically worked because it was small, portable, and very hard to duplicate.
Right.
So precious things that are very rare and hard to duplicate tend to hold their value if they're small and can be moved around. And art and stuff like that, in certain extent, can also be considered a store of value, right? If it's the right art. So there you have it. Tricky asset to call, tricky market to call. But at the end of the day, we want to be very careful that we don't allow our confirmation bias or the algorithms are designed to feed us to keep us paying attention to get us to lean too far into any one investment thesis, because if you bet the farm and you bet wrong, right, you cease to manage your risk.
So you haven't bet the entire farm on NFTs yet?
No. Does it surprise you?
I promise you, David, I can draw something on a napkin over here, and I will sell it to you for a low price of $200.
It makes so much sense. I don't know how I couldn't do it.
Yeah, perfect. We explained NFTs in under 30 seconds.
There you go. All right. For the last few minutes here, we're going to have some fun.
Okay.
And this is something I want to encourage folks to do this online. You can go to our Facebook page if you want to participate. What we've asked for is financial terms that they may or may not be real, okay? But we've asked people to give us possible financial terms, and we are to define them on air. And we've had a few people that have thrown some out, and so we're going to have some fun here. Okay. And I would like this to become a recurring theme on the program. So go to our Facebook page if you'd like, and we'll probably come up with others later too, but we'll start there. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and put it in the comments and give us any financial terms that you would like defined. The question is, are they or are they not real terms? The first one on the list is a real term. The question is this a real definition? The term is stagflation.
Okay.
Matt, what is stagflation?
Do you want the actual definition?
You hit me with your best shot.
Well, I'm going to give you one that's funnier.
Okay.
So when I think of a stag, I think of going to New Zealand on a hunt and I'm just gonna say I flattened it with my bullet. Stagflation.
Okay, flattened, and I will go with stagflation is years 2 through 5 when a mature elk is growing, right? So that is so it's an elk between the ages of 2 and 5 years old. That's stagflation.
It's growing. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I can see the horns growing.
Okay.
Next one.
Next one. Ooh, this is a fun fictional financial term. Balanced budget.
What's that?
Yeah, that's I was like, yes, you're right. That is in fact.
How about lofty things that politicians will tell you to get a vote?
Yeah. What is? I'll say anything to get elected, Alex.
That is correct. $1,000.
Okay. And you know, I say that with all reverence because I know Alex passed away. All right, next one. $1.
Something that won't buy you a McChicken any longer.
Right. It's like a former dollar menu. Former value menu price point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right. So that one's fun. This one is fun. Conflational.
I think of confetti.
You think of confetti? How is that a financial term?
I don't know.
Okay, we're gonna have to work on this one with you. Conflational.
Conflational.
Right? So let's see.
Confetti. My mind is.
Yeah, you're already on to dessert.
Yeah. I didn't get my daily dessert, so I'm a little hangry.
Okay. So I'm gonna conflational. That sounds like I'm gonna go with that comes out of the Congressional Budget Office, and this is the mathematical computation for how much the tax bracket should increase on billionaires. So that's a conflational. We're going to do a conflational calculation, and then we're going to assert a billionaire tax.
Well, we're on the C's. I'm gonna throw one your way. Crypto cramp.
Crypto cramp. Look at that. We're out of time. Oh, we'll have to deal with it later. Who knew? All right. Well, if you want the answer, check it out online. But until next time, we got to go. How do they reach us, Matt?
541-375-0898.
All right. Until next time, this has been David Littlejohn.
And Matt Dixon.
And you've been listening to True Wealth on News Radio 1240 KQEN.
Crypto cramp. When you make
crypto cramp. It's exact. All right. So a crypto cramp is when you